The market had been
Shh, it's all
closed for
right. I'm
2
here.
hours,
We
but
have
the
to
smell
go.
of bread
Now.
stayed.
Where?
It hung between the empty stalls the way a promise hangs in a room after the person who made it has already left. Wood smoke from the baker's chimney, the faint sweetness of bruised apples that had fallen from a crate and been left where they landed. And underneath all of it, the cold. The cold of an October night in the hill country, the kind that doesn't announce itself but simply arrives and begins its work without ceremony, settling into joints and seams and the spaces between fingers pressed together for warmth. Kessa sat beneath a trestle table at the far end of the market square, her back against the stone wall, her daughters pressed into her sides, a canvas cover draped to the ground on 3 sides. On the 4th, by loss hour, the wind came through, 9 days. That was how long they had been out. 9 days since she had grabbed the bag she kept behind the winter coats, the one Breck didn't know about because she had packed it in pieces over 3 months, a change of clothes 1 week, a water skin the next, her good knife wrapped in a scarf and pushed to the back corner where shadows did the hiding for her. 9 days since she had walked out the door at midnight with no shoes on because shoes made sound and sound woke Breck, and Breck awake at midnight was the specific version of him she had spent 4 years learning to avoid. Wren had carried Bryn on her back for the first mile. 7 years old, and she hadn't made a sound, hadn't asked a single question, just bent forward and took her sister's weight the way someone takes a familiar burden, without ceremony, without complaint, because it was what needed to happen, and Wren had always understood what needed to happen before anyone said it out loud. 3 towns since then, no shelter with room, no hand that reached out, and somewhere behind them, a man who would be looking. Breck always looked, not from love. You don't search this hard for something you love. You search this hard for something you consider yours. Wren hadn't spoken in some time. She sat on Kessa's left side with her arms loose at her sides, her eyes moving across the market square in a pattern that wasn't random. North entrance, east alley, the dry fountain at the square's center. Back to north. The cycle took approximately 8 seconds. Ultimately, she had been running it since they arrived, since she had checked the cover of the canvas and decided this position offered the best sight lines and the second fastest route to the East Road. She was 7 years old. Kessa's hand tightened on Wren's shoulder without meaning to. She loosened it before Wren could register it as pressure, but Wren registered everything. She always had. She had been registering things since she was 4 years old, since she had first stood in a doorway watching something she should not have had to watch, and had filed it away in the place where children file the things they cannot process but cannot discard. Bryn was on Kessa's other side, watching something move across the cobblestones. A beetle. It was carrying a fragment of something, a crumb, a seed, impossible to identify in this light, moving with the total determination of a creature that had somewhere specific to be and intended to get there regardless of the scale of the journey relative to its own size. "He's going home," Bryn said. Her voice was soft and certain, the voice of a 5-year-old reporting a fact she was pleased to have observed. "Maybe," Kessa said. "Does he have a home? Beetles always have homes where, under things, rocks, old wood, they find places. Do we have a place?" Kessa looked at the canvas above them, at the stone wall behind them, at the market square lying empty in the dark. "We have right here," she said, "under a table. Under a table is still a place." Bryn considered this. She watched the beetle disappear into a crack between 2 stones. She said with satisfaction, "He made it. He did. He was small, but he made it. Small things usually do." Bryn turned her face up to Kessa with the particular trust of a child who has not yet learned to distrust comfort. She was still holding her doll, had been holding it since they left, had carried it tucked under one arm through 3 towns and 9 nights. The doll's painted face watching everything with an expression of mild interest that had not changed. "Mommy." Bryn looked at her own feet, which were bare on the cold stone. "Are you hungry?" "Are you?" I asked first. "My tummy is making sounds." "What kind of sounds?" "The angry kind. Tummies aren't angry. Mine is." Kessa almost smiled. She felt it move through her face and stop just short of arriving, the way warmth moves through a wall with too much stone between it and the room. "Yours is loud too," said Wren from the other side. Not accusing, not pushing, just accurate the way Wren was accurate about everything. filing observations without judgment and reporting them without softening. I heard it. Mommy, Bryn said. Her voice changed, the way her voice changed when she was asking something she had been holding for a while and had finally decided to release. Will we starve tomorrow? The bread smell vanished. The cold came back. Kessa heard the question travel outward from the small body pressed against her side and keep going, out past the canvas, out into the square where the wind moved through and found nothing to stop it. No, baby. How do you know? Because I won't let that happen. But you didn't eat today. I'm not hungry. Ren's voice came level from the other side. Your stomach says different. Bryn nodded once, confirming testimony, and lay her head against Kessa's arm. Then she looked up again, the way Bryn looked up when a thought arrived that she had not been expecting. Mommy, baby, if we go back home. Bryn paused, not for effect, not from hesitation, but the pause of a child fitting words to a thing she has been observing and is now reporting. If we go back home, will Daddy hit you again? The air changed. Ren's hand shot out and covered her sister's mouth. Don't say that out here. Bryn pushed the hand away. Why, because people hear. So people ask questions. What questions? The kind that make us go back. Kessa pulled both girls closer, arms around them, chin resting on Bryn's head. She closed her eyes. We're fine, she said. The words came out before she could stop them. The same words she had said to Breck's mother, to the healer who had noticed the bruise along her jaw and had paused with her hand raised and her eyes asking the question her mouth was too careful to form. The lie that gets inherited. Not taught, just absorbed, available on short notice, costing less each time it was used. Ren looked at her mother, 7 years old, with the look of a child who had heard that sentence enough times to know exactly what it cost and had started keeping a private count. Kessa saw the look, felt it. She held her daughters tighter and did not say anything else, and the wind came through the open side of the canvas, and somewhere behind them in a house with a broken lock that she had fixed herself and he had broken again, a man was sleeping or not sleeping and would, when morning came, begin the arithmetic of finding them. Breck always looked. Kessa sat with her daughters in the dark and listened to Bryn's breathing, slow towards sleep, and watched Ren's eyes run their cycle, and understood that fine had never meant what the word was supposed to mean, and that somewhere in the distance between what she said and what was true, 4 years had passed. She did not let herself think about what happened next. Next was tomorrow. Tonight was the canvas and the cold and the smell of someone else's bread and the sound of her younger daughter breathing and her older daughter counting. She sat upright and did not sleep. Corva saw them first because Corva saw everything first. This was a quality her father attributed to sharp eyes, and her teachers attributed to a fundamental inability to leave something alone once she had noticed it, and her mother had once called it a gift before her mother was in a position to call anything, anything. All 3 assessments were correct, and Corva had decided they were not in conflict. She was 12. Tall for her age, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid because loose hair was, in Corva's considered opinion, an aesthetic choice that came at the cost of function, and Corva had strong opinions about that trade. She walked beside her father through the empty market square carrying a basket of turnips, which she found philosophically objectionable. Turnips are the worst vegetable, she said. Turnips are essential, Orrin said. So is firewood. Nobody makes me eat firewood. They're nutritious. So is a correctly cooked anything else. The turnip has never been necessary. It has simply failed to be replaced. Orrin let this one go. His daughter had inherited from her mother the ability to pursue an argument until the other person ran out of logical ground to stand on. Arguing with Corva was like arguing with a current. Technically possible, never productive. They were crossing the square toward the east road when Corva stopped walking. What? Orrin said. There's someone under that table. Which table? Far end, canvas sides. That's a closed market stall. Someone sheltering for the night. There are at least 3 people, and one of them doesn't have shoes. Orrin looked at the table. The square was dark. The lamp from the inn at the corner threw its light in the wrong direction. How can you possibly see that? Look at the bottom edge of the canvas on the south side, where it doesn't reach the ground. He shifted the turnip basket and looked. He saw it then, a small foot, just visible at the canvas edge. Green-skinned, bare, toes curled from the cold. A child's foot. and beside it, further along, the edge of something larger. Stray, he said, someone passing through. Strays wear shoes. Not always. That child doesn't have shoes, and it's October. Oren set the basket on the low wall beside him. He looked at his daughter. She was already looking at him with the expression that had lived in her face since she was 8 years old. Since the letter had arrived from 2 towns south, and the world had reorganized itself around an absence that never stopped being an absence. Her mother's eyes, her mother's specific inability to walk past something that had the wrong shape. His jaw tightened, not from irritation, from a different kind of recognition. Merritt, his sister. She had married a man who was pleasant at markets and at community gatherings, and at the table of anyone who might form an opinion of him, and who was something different in rooms with closed doors. The kind of different that takes years and leaves marks in places covered by long sleeves and expresses itself as exhaustion when healers ask and as nothing when neighbors ask, because neighbors have decided that the cost of asking is higher than the cost of not knowing. Oren had gone to visit twice a year, had received her letters once a month. Every letter said, "We're fine, Oren." Every visit she was thinner and smiled harder and asked about his work with the focus of someone who needed the conversation to stay pointed away from certain things. He had been 2 towns away buying grain supplies when the healer was called. He had walked the distance between his location and hers at something that was not running, because running had felt obscene, some third movement between grief and denial. The movement of a man who already knows what he is walking toward and cannot slow down and cannot make himself go faster, because faster means arriving and arriving means it's true. The healer said exhaustion. The neighbor said nothing. The bruises said everything, clearly and without ambiguity, but bruises don't testify in any court that matters. "Dad," Corva said, "you're doing it again. I'm thinking. You've been thinking at the turnip basket for 40 seconds. I'm allowed to think. The child under that table doesn't have shoes, and it's October, and I'm 12 years old, and I'm already walking over there, so the question is whether you're coming." He picked up the basket. Corva was already walking toward the canvas table with the direct, unhurried pace of someone who had already made the decision and was simply closing the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. She crouched at the edge of the canvas and lifted it. 3 faces looked back at her, 1 adult, 2 children, all orc, green-skinned, broad-featured, with the wide dark eyes of a people built for low light and distances. The adult's face carried a bruise along the left cheekbone, yellowing at the edges, old enough that healing had started, recent enough that the memory of how it got there was still immediate. Corva recognized that specific shade of yellow. Not on this face. On a face she knew from the description in a letter her father had kept in the box under his bed. A healer's accounting of what she had found when she arrived too late, written down because someone needed to say it even if the people who most needed to hear it were not listening. The older girl's eyes found her immediately and stayed there, not with fear, with the steady, expressionless assessment of someone who had learned to read the danger level of a situation before the situation had a chance to read them. 7, maybe. She looked older in the way certain children look older, not from age but from the specific wearing away of certain kinds of innocence. Her eyes ran a quick inventory of Corva, of the square behind her, of the distance between the canvas and the east road. The younger one was holding a doll. She looked at Corva with open curiosity, the uncomplicated attention of a child who has not yet been fully educated in the unreliability of strangers. "Hello," Corva said. The older girl spoke. "Go away, are you cold? Go away, your sister isn't wearing shoes. She doesn't need shoes. It's October. She doesn't need October either." Corva filed that one away. It deserved to be thought about later. "Are you hungry?" Corva asked. "We don't need anything." The mother's words arrived fast and smooth, the fluency of a sentence that had been used many times and had worn itself down to automatic. "I didn't ask what you need." Corva kept her voice level, without the brightness people sometimes used with strangers to signal harmlessness. Brightness felt false and false felt wrong. "I asked if you were hungry. Those aren't the same question." "We're fine." Fine is what people say when they've decided not to want help. Hungry is a physical fact regardless of what you've decided. The mother looked at her, really looked at her. 12 years old, crouching in the dirt of a market square at night, talking with the flat precision of someone who had grown up in a house where precision was what you brought to hard conversations. Who taught you to talk like that? The mother said. My mother. Where is she? Dead. The mother's expression shifted. I'm sorry. It was 4 years ago. I'm not sorry anymore. I'm just accurate. The younger girl leaned forward with interest. You talk funny. Everyone says that. Is it because you're human? It's because I'm right. The older girl had not moved. Her eyes had not left Corva since the canvas came up. She was running her evaluation with the thoroughness of someone who had learned that incomplete assessments were the dangerous kind. She watched Corva's hands, her posture, the direction of her attention, the quality of her stillness. What do you want? The older girl said. My father has food and a stove. We don't need a stove. You're under a market table in October with one pair of shoes between three people. Corva paused, not for effect, but because the next sentence needed to arrive with the right weight. So I'm going to stay here until you tell me something that makes sense as a reason not to come inside. The older girl looked at the mother. The mother was looking at Corva. Where is your father? The mother asked. Corva pointed. Oren stood near the dry fountain, 40 steps across the square. Broad through the shoulders, somewhere around 50, with the jaw of a man who had formed opinions about most things and the posture of a man who had learned that bringing opinions forward before being invited was a way of making things worse. He was holding the turnip basket and looking at the sky, at the cobblestones, at the lamplight from the inn, at everything that was not the canvas table. He's big, the mother said. He's harmless. Big men are rarely harmless. My father is afraid of moths. A pause. Moths, Corva confirmed. He won't go near them. When one gets inside the house, I deal with it because he removes himself from the room until it's handled. A man who manages trade disputes for this entire district and cannot handle a moth. The mother was quiet. Why is he standing over there? She asked. Corva looked at her father. At his posture, the specific quality of stillness in it, the way he was maintaining his position with the discipline of someone who had made a decision and was keeping it through effort rather than ease. Because Corva said, the last time he walked towards someone who needed help, he arrived too late. She was his sister. Her husband hurt her for a long time, and my father was 2 towns away when it ended. He came back and she was gone. He said afterward that he had kept choosing to believe she was fine because believing otherwise was harder. She paused. He doesn't walk toward people anymore. He thinks waiting is what he deserves. The mother went very still. You're telling me this because you have a bruise on your face that's yellowing, because your older daughter has been scanning this square since I lifted this canvas, because your little one just asked if you were going to starve tomorrow. Corva looked at her directly. And because I'm 12, not stupid. The mother's name, Corva would learn later, was Kessa. But at this moment, under the lifted canvas edge with the cold coming through the open side and the square empty around them, she was a woman with a yellow bruise and 2 daughters and the expression of someone who had been reading the exit routes of every room she entered for 4 years and had not yet found a room where the exits weren't the most important feature. She was looking at Corva the way people look at something they are not yet willing to call what it is. Then Bryn made a sound, small, involuntary, the sound a body makes when it has been patient with cold for long enough and has run out of patience. Her teeth had begun to chatter. The tiniest sound, barely audible over the wind coming through the canvas, but Kessa heard it the way mothers hear things, through the part of the body that runs beneath the reach of ordinary hearing. Her feet are cold, Corva said. She said it quietly without urgency, placing the fact in the air where it could be seen. Kessa looked at Bryn's feet, at Ren, who had gone still in the particular way Ren went still when she was processing something important. Her eyes fixed on the middle distance, her hands flat on her knees. At the man standing 40 steps away, who was looking at the sky. He won't come any closer, Kessa said. It was not quite a question. Not unless you want him to. What if I don't want him to? Then he stands there until we leave. Ren spoke from Kessa's other side without changing her expression. He put the basket down. Kessa looked. Oren had set the turnip basket on the low wall and taken 1 step back from it. He was still looking away. It was not the posture of indifference. It was the posture of a man making a demonstration through the discipline of not moving, showing through stillness that the distance between himself and the canvas table was a distance that belonged to the woman under it. How long has he been standing there? Kessa asked. Since I came to find you. Bryn's teeth chattered again. Kessa closed her eyes for 3 seconds. She opened them and looked at her daughters. Wren with her soldier's eyes running their cycle in the dark. Bryn with her bare feet tucked under her, the toes gone from cold to the thing past cold that starts to hurt. One night, Kessa said. Corva nodded. If he, Kessa started, he's afraid of moths. That's not a guarantee of anything. No, Corva held her gaze. It's just true. And sometimes true is the best thing available. Kessa looked at her for a long moment. Then she pushed herself up from the wall. Wren stood before Kessa had fully risen. The reflex of a child who had learned to be ready before ready was called for. Bryn reached for Corva's hand with her free hand, the unthinking reflex of a 5-year-old who had not yet been fully educated in the unreliability of strangers, and Corva took it. Wren watched this. She watched Bryn's hand in the older girl's hand. She watched the man by the fountain who was still looking away, who had not moved since putting down the basket. She said nothing. She walked beside her mother at 2 steps back from Corva and Bryn, watching the man as the distance between them closed. 30 steps, 20, 15. Oren looked at them when they were close enough that looking away would have become its own statement. His eyes went to Kessa's face first, to the yellow bruise, to the way she held herself, not the posture of a woman walking, but the posture of a woman maintaining a controlled perimeter around 2 smaller bodies, every movement calibrated for coverage. Then to Wren, who was looking at him with the expression of a soldier entering terrain she had not had adequate time to scout, cataloging everything, giving nothing. Then to Bryn, who was looking at the turnip basket. Are those turnips? Bryn asked. They are, Oren said. His voice was low. Not soft exactly. The voice of a man who had learned that taking up less space than available was usually the right choice. I don't like turnips. Neither does Corva. Then why do you have them? Oren looked at the basket, then back at Bryn, with the expression of a man who had been asking himself this question for longer than the conversation suggested. Because I keep thinking someone else will come around to them, he said, and I keep being wrong about that. Has anyone ever come around? Not in 12 years. Bryn looked up at Kessa. He talks about turnips like they're waiting for someone. Kessa didn't answer. She was looking at Oren's hands. He had let them rest at his sides. Open, fingers slightly spread, not a deliberate display, but the hands of a man who was aware that hands could be read and was making sure his said what he meant them to say. One night, Kessa said, as long as you need. One night, understood. He picked up the basket, fell into step beside Corva, and behind Kessa and Wren, maintaining a distance that said everything about what he understood. Not too close, not far enough to make the gesture meaningless. The exact distance of a man who knew that trust between people who have been hurt is built in silences and measured in inches. The market square emptied behind them. The canvas trestle table shifted once in the wind. Wren walked beside her mother at 2 steps back, her eyes moving between the road ahead and the man to her left, counting his steps, measuring his pace, building the geometry of this new situation, the way she built all situations, with total attention and no visible expression, and the vigilance of a child who has learned that the only reliable safety is knowing everything first. She didn't speak. But at the moment they turned from the square onto the east road, her counting paused for one full cycle. She was watching Bryn, who was walking beside Corva with her small hand in the older girl's hand, swinging it slightly, the unself-conscious rhythm of a child who had briefly forgotten to be afraid. Something moved through Wren's face. Gone before it fully arrived. She resumed her count. Oren's house was 3 streets east and 1 north, at the edge of the residential quarter where the buildings gave way to woodsheds and kitchen gardens going dormant for the winter. Stone walls, a heavy door, the kind of roof that said someone had maintained it for a long time out of genuine care rather than obligation. Kessa stood in the doorway, the threshold, not inside. The front door had a bolt. She had noticed it before she noticed the stove, before she noticed anything else in the room, the way your eyes go to certain things first because the body has learned to prioritize them. You can come in? Oren said. She looked at the bolt. At the stove in the corner of the main room, iron-bellied, radiating the kind of heat that makes a body realize how deeply cold it has been. At the walls, solid and dry. At the ceiling with no soft spots, no stains from neglected rain. Bryn walked straight to the stove and sat on the floor in front of it with her palms out, and her fingers spread and her eyes closed, absorbing warmth the way dry ground absorbs rain, completely, without reservation, without the caution of someone deciding how much of a good thing she was entitled to. She's smart, Oren said. She's cold, Corva said. Those aren't different things. Wren stood just inside the door. She had already located both windows, both with working latches. The back door at the end of the hall, bolt thrown from inside, distance from the front door to the nearest exit point, 8 seconds at a walk, less at speed, her personal record. Kessa stepped across the threshold. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at everything she had just noted, and then at her younger daughter in front of the stove, and her older daughter measuring the distance to the nearest exit, and understood that she had said one night and meant it as a limit and also as a question. And the question was whether limits like that still made sense in a room with a bolt and a stove, and a man who stood 40 steps away in a dark square because he no longer trusted himself to close distances without permission. One night, she said again, to herself as much as anyone. Wren looked at her. The cycle continued. North wall, back door, front door, windows. Kessa sat down on the bench near the table and kept her back straight and watched the room and did not let herself believe, not yet, that believing was something available to her here. But she did not sit by the door. That was something. Corva heated soup without asking whether anyone wanted it, because asking would have given Kessa the option to refuse. And Corva had already decided that option was not going to exist tonight. She served it in clay bowls, 4 of them, set them on the table without ceremony. Bryn came from the stove and ate with both hands, the way a child eats when she has been counting bites for 9 days and has been told to stop counting, fast and messy, and with small sounds of relief she didn't know she was making. Wren ate slowly. She sat at the chair nearest the door. She watched Oren between bites, tracking his movements with the focused neutrality of a continuous evaluation. "You cook?" Wren asked him. "I survive," he said. "Is there a difference?" "Is there? Your soup tastes like someone tried but wasn't paying full attention. Would paying more attention help? Would listening to your daughter help?" He looked at his bowl. "About everything." Kessa almost laughed. It surprised her, the fact that the mechanism was still there, still capable of being triggered. After the bowls were cleared, Corva showed them the bedrooms. 2 doors at the end of a short hallway. 2 beds, both real, both with blankets chosen for warmth rather than appearance. "The beds are real," Wren said, standing in the doorway to the first room. "What did you expect?" Corva asked. "I expected worse. Worse than beds. We've been sleeping under a table. That was temporary. Everything is temporary. Beds are just honest about it." Corva looked at her. "You're 7, I'm accurate." Oren, passing in the hallway, made a sound into his cup that might have been agreement. Bryn climbed onto the bed nearest the window, the one that had been Ellen's mother's, and stretched out flat with her arms wide and her legs straight, taking up the entire surface with the unself-conscious extravagance of a child who has just discovered that space is available. "Mommy," she said, I forgot what this felt like." Kessa sat on the edge of the second bed. She didn't lie down. She sat the way she had been sitting for 9 nights, upright, her weight forward, her body refusing to believe that horizontal was a thing available to her. Wren appeared in the doorway. She looked at her mother's posture. "You should lie down," she said. "I'm fine sitting. You always sit. I'm comfortable. You're watching the door. I'm resting." Resting people closed their eyes. Wren, Mom. They looked at each other. 7, an orc and mother and daughter, and the look contained everything about the arrangement they had developed between them over 4 years. The distribution of vigilance, the unspoken agreement about who watched which direction, the exhaustion of having maintained it for longer than either of them should have had to. "Fine," Kessa said. She lay back on the bed. The mattress met her body the way a firm thing meets something that has been braced for a long time and has forgotten how to release. She felt the resistance leave her back in stages, the way tension leaves slowly when the body finally believes the ground beneath it will hold. "Close your eyes," Wren said. "They're closed. They're not." Kessa closed them. Ellen appeared in the doorway behind Wren, holding a blanket. "Here," she said to Wren. "You look cold." "I'm not cold. You're shivering." "I do that. From cold. From things. I don't sort it." Wren looked at the blanket, then at Corva. Then she took it, without saying thank you. but she wrapped it around her shoulders with both hands and pulled it close, which was its own kind of answer. Corva went to her room. Oren sat by the stove in the main room with a cup of something he wasn't drinking, listening to the sounds of the house, the settling of four bodies into beds, the shifting of blankets, the small, unconscious sounds of children going towards sleep. He sat for a long time, listening to his house hold more people than it had held in 4 years. There was something in the sound of it he did not have a clean word for. Not happiness exactly. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as relief, but was quieter than that. The specific quality of a silence that has more than one person in it. Ren lay awake after everyone else slept. She stared at the ceiling, solid. No soft spots, no water stains, no evidence of a roof that had been patched with intention and forgotten with habit. A stranger's ceiling, above a stranger's bed, under a stranger's blanket that smelled like a girl who said things like, "I'm right," and meant it without apology. She knew these walls, not these specific walls, but walls like them, walls that felt like an answer on the first night and became a question by the third. She had learned not to trust the first night of anything. First nights were when things showed what they wanted you to see. Third nights were when things showed what they were. She had counted the exits. Front door, 8 seconds. Back door, 11. East window, 14, accounting for the latch. West window, 12. She had her route memorized in the dark. She lay on her back with her hands at her sides, and she breathed, and she did not sleep, and she listened to her mother's breathing on the other bed, which had finally, for the first time in 9 nights, deepened past the shallow rhythm of a woman who sleeps with half her attention on the nearest door. Kessa was actually sleeping. Ren listened to this for a long time. She looked at the ceiling and thought about the beetle in the market square. The one Bryn had watched carry its crumb across the cobblestones and disappear into the crack between stones. The way it had moved, without hesitation, without looking back, because it knew exactly which crack was its crack and had gone directly to it. She thought about what it meant to know which crack was yours. She thought about the house they had left 9 days ago. She knew every sound it made, every floorboard, every door, every way the wind found the gaps around the windows in October. She knew which hours were safe and which were not, which moods preceded which silences were the beginning of something, and which silences were just silence. She didn't know any of those things about this house, and her mother was sleeping, really sleeping. Ren lay in the dark for a long time and thought and breathed, and the house was quiet around her, and somewhere in the accounting she was running, she arrived at a conclusion she did not want to arrive at and could not avoid once it had presented itself. She sat up. She put on her shoes. She went to the table in the main room, found a piece of charcoal in the cup beside the lamp, and found a market receipt on the table's edge. She wrote on the back of it. She was 7, and her letters were not elegant, but they were readable. "We were fine before. I'm going back to fine." She put the note on the bed under the edge of the blanket where Kessa's hand would find it. She lifted the latch on the front door with the practiced quiet of a child who had been lifting latches quietly for years. She stepped out into cold that hit her face like an open hand. She did not look back. Looking back was for people who weren't sure, and Ren was sure. She was going home, where the walls were familiar and the danger was a known quantity, and she understood which hours to avoid, and which moods were the beginning of something, and the floor was a mattress she had slept on since she was 3 years old, and the man who lived there was terrible, but at least he was a terrible she had mapped completely. The road south was dark. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough to see by. But Ren's eyes were orc eyes, built for low light and long distances, and the dark was not an obstacle. It was just the road without lamplight, a road she could read as clearly as a word on a page. She walked south, toward the town they had come from, toward the house she had counted exits in since she was 4 years old. Toward a door she knew how to lock from inside because she had watched her mother lock it every night for years and had watched the lock not matter, and had kept watching anyway because watching was the thing that made her useful. She walked. The road was empty and cold, and she was 7 years old and she walked without slowing. Kessa woke to absence. Not the absence of sound, the absence of weight. The specific missing that happens when a body that has slept beside yours for 7 years is suddenly not there, and the space where it was is different from ordinary empty space, denser somehow, the shape of what was there still present in the air. She reached across the bed. Empty. Wren. Nothing. Wren. She was up and checking the second bed before the word had finished leaving her mouth. Empty. The blanket folded at the foot with the deliberate neatness of a child who had thought about the gesture before making it. Under the fold, barely visible, the edge of a market receipt. She read it by the light from the stove's vents. Her hands did not shake. They went still, which was worse. Stillness was what happened when her body moved past the shaking into something older and quieter and more fundamental. We were fine before. I'm going back to fine. She read it twice. Then she put the note in her pocket and went to the main room. Orrin was in the doorway from the hall. He slept lightly. He always had, the habit of a man who had learned that the important things happened when everyone else was unconscious. What's wrong, he said. Wren is gone. Gone where? South, back to him. Why would she go back to him? Kessa looked at him and felt the inadequacy of any answer she could give to that question. The way sometimes the true answer to a thing is so much larger than the question that fitting it into words feels like trying to carry a river in a cup. Because she's 7, she said, and the worst she knows is still better than the best she doesn't. Because the house we left is a house she understands completely, and this house she doesn't understand at all. Because I was sleeping, and she has never seen me sleep before. Orrin looked at the note, then at Kessa. How long? I don't know. She waited until I was deep enough under that I wouldn't hear the latch. How long have you been asleep? She paused. I don't sleep. Not really. You slept tonight. And my daughter walked out the door. The guilt in her voice was physical, a weight pressing down on the words until they bent under it. We'll find her, Orrin said. I'll go. You don't know this road. It's the South Road. It's a straight line. You don't know her tracks. Kessa was already moving to the door, taking her coat from the hook, her boots from the mat. I know how she walks, the weight she puts on her left heel, the way her right toe drags when she's tired. I can track her in the dark. Orc eyes? Yes, I don't have orc eyes. Then put your hand on my shoulder and I'll see for both of us. She was out the door before he had his coat on. He followed, pulling it around him, reaching for the lamp hanging by the door. Leave it, Kessa said without turning. It'll blind me. He set it back on its hook. She was already on the road, her eyes adjusted and reading, crouched for a moment at the first patch of soft ground past the stones, her fingers moving an inch above the surface without touching. She found Wren's prints in seconds. Left heel pressure, right toe drag, the gait of a child moving with purpose on tired feet. She started walking. Orrin fell in 2 steps behind her, placed his hand on her left shoulder as she'd said, and felt the specific quality of her movement, purposeful and calibrated. The walk of a woman reading a language written in dirt. She's moving fast, Kessa said. For a 7-year-old on a cold road at this hour, she's moving fast. How far ahead? Half a mile, maybe more. Can you track its speed? I can track at whatever speed she walked. Kessa moved faster. They went south on the dark road, Kessa reading the prints and Orrin trusting her completely, in the way you trust a person whose competence you can feel through your hand. And the cold was clean and sharp, and the half-moon threw its thin light across the fields on either side of the road. She's slowing, Kessa said after 20 minutes. Tired, or she's found the road sign. The trade route junction is ahead. If she remembers the way home, she'll turn east at the junction. She remembers everything, Kessa said. Everything. They came to the junction. The road divided north, south, and east. A wooden post with 2 boards pointing different directions. Kessa crouched at the fork and read the ground in the thin moonlight, and then stood. She went east. The trade road leads to Graymore. There's an inn at Graymore, Orrin said. Kessa was already walking east. How do you know he's at the inn, Orrin asked. Because Breck doesn't sleep rough. He doesn't camp. He finds the nearest place that serves drink, and he stays until the drink or the money runs out. He's been on this road long enough. He'll have found the inn. How far is Graymore? 2 miles. Kessa. I know, she said. She said it without stopping. I know what we're walking toward. I know what he'll say to her when he finds a child alone on the road at night. She paused. I know what she'll believe because she wants to believe it, and she's 7. He walked behind her and said nothing, and they covered the 2 miles in just over half an hour, and the inn at Graymore appeared at the road's edge, low and square, smoke leaking from a chimney that needed relining, a door that hung slightly off its top hinge. A brown horse stood at the hitching post, ribs showing, head low, the horse of a man who treated the things that carried him as tools rather than creatures. Kessa stopped. She looked at the horse, at the door, at the window with its orange glow. "He's inside," she said. Orrin came up beside her. "How do you know?" "The horse. He has one horse. This is it." The horse lifted its head and looked at them with the patient, exhausted expression of an animal that has been here before and will be here again and has made its peace with it. Kessa said, "I'm going in. Not alone. She's my daughter. And he's twice your size. He has been twice my size in every room I've been in with him for 4 years." She looked at Orrin directly. "I've been managing it. Not safely, but managing. Managing isn't safe." "No," she looked back at the door. "Nothing about this has ever been safe." She went in. Orrin followed 3 steps behind. The inn was dark and warm in the way of places that are warm because of too many bodies and too little ventilation rather than because of any deliberate comfort. 3 lamps, all of them smoking. 2 men at a table near the door who looked up and looked away again. The innkeeper behind his counter, looking at nothing in particular. At the back table in the corner where the light was thinnest, Breck sat with a cup in front of him and his coat open and the specific stillness of a man who had been drinking with purpose for several hours. His eyes were bloodshot. His jaw carried 2 weeks of growth. Wren sat across from him. Her hands were flat on the table. Her back was straight. Her face was the face she wore when she was performing her assessment of a situation and had not yet reached a conclusion, or had reached one she didn't like. Breck was leaning forward, his elbows on the table, speaking low. His right hand rested on the table between them, not touching Wren, but positioned at the edge of her path to the door. Kessa knew that hand position. She moved through the room without hurrying. The 2 men near the door did not look up again. The innkeeper polished a cup and found something interesting about the middle distance. She was close enough to hear before Breck registered her presence. "Just tell me which direction," Breck was saying. "That's all I need. Which road did you take from the market?" "I don't remember," Wren said. "You remember everything. You always have. I didn't count that time." "You're lying. I'm 7. 7-year-olds who count exits can count roads." Wren's expression did not change. "Tell me about the road if you want." "I still don't remember." Breck's hand moved on the table, not grabbing, moving toward her in the incremental way of someone who has learned to do things in increments, testing what each increment returns before committing to the next one. "I came looking for you," he said. "That means something. You came looking for Mommy. I came because I love your mother." Wren looked at him with her soldier's eyes. "You asked where she went," she said. "You didn't ask where I slept. You didn't ask if I ate today. You didn't ask if I was cold." She paused. "You asked where Mommy went 3 times. Breck's face shifted, the specific expression of a man who has been read accurately by someone he had not expected to read him accurately. A person he had underestimated in the way certain men underestimate everything that is small or young or female. "Wren, I'm your father, I know. I love you. You love Mommy." She looked at her hands flat on the table. "I'm just the map." The sentence landed on the table between them like a dropped glass. Breck stared at his daughter, and his daughter looked back at him, and the thing on his face was not guilt exactly. It was the thing adjacent to guilt. The expression of a man who has been named precisely and doesn't like the name and can't dispute it. "That's not what," he started. "You haven't asked if I ate today," Wren said again. "You haven't asked where I slept. You haven't asked if my feet are cold." She said it with the flat precision of a 7-year-old who had learned to observe the way that certain people who survive difficult situations learn to observe, with total attention and no performance of the emotion attached to the observation. "You asked where Mommy is. 3 times. I'm not a map." "Wren, I'm not a map." Kessa stepped forward into the light, into his line of sight. Breck's expression changed again, the bloodshot eyes focusing, the specific focusing of a man who has found the thing he was looking for. "Vela," he said, her old name, the one he had used to call her before she understood what being called it meant. "Kessa, come home." His voice had shifted into the register he used when he wanted things, the lower frequency, the one that used to work. "Come home, and we'll forget all of this. Get away from my daughter, our daughter." A man who uses his child as a compass doesn't get to say our. I wasn't using her. I was looking for you. She told you what she saw. Kessa kept her voice level. She's 7 years old and she sat across from you and told you what you did and you're trying to argue with her about it. Breck started to stand. Ren stood first. She pushed her chair back and stood and walked around the end of the table to Kessa and stood behind her. Not beside, not ahead, behind. The place where a child stands when she has chosen someone and is demonstrating the choice without words. When she is saying with her body the things she has already said with her voice and wants to say one more time in a language that doesn't need to be translated. We're leaving, Kessa said. You're not taking them again. I'm not taking them. She looked at him steadily. They're walking with me, away from you. You can watch it happen. I'll find you again. You'll try. I always find you, Vela. You found a 7-year-old on a road at night. Kessa held his eyes. That's not finding. That's a child making a mistake she won't make again. She turned. Ren turned with her. They walked toward the door. Oren was there, visible in the lamp's edge, standing in the door's threshold with the stillness of a man who had found his position and intended to keep it. A wall that happened to have eyes and hands and the specific posture of someone who had decided that this particular doorway was not going to be anything other than an exit. Breck didn't follow. He sat at his back table with his cup and his horse outside and the empty chair across from him, and the word map sitting where his daughter had been, too small for the space it had occupied, too heavy to move. Outside, the air was cold and clean. He'll come, Ren said. She said it without looking back, her voice flat and certain. I know. He knows which direction we were going. I know that too. Kessa looked down at her older daughter, at the profile of a child who had walked south in the dark toward a familiar danger rather than lie in an unfamiliar safety, and who was now walking north in the same dark with her face turned forward. Are you afraid? Kessa asked. Ren was quiet for a moment. Not of him, she said. Not anymore. What changed? He didn't ask if I was hungry. Kessa stopped walking. She turned and looked at her daughter, at this small person who had been running 8-second cycles since she was 4 years old and carrying things that should not have fit in a body that size, who had walked out in the dark toward the things she knew because she was afraid of the things she didn't, and who had just told her, in the most precise possible way, what she had needed to see to make the choice she had made. Kessa crouched down on the road. She opened her arms. Ren walked into them without hesitating. Kessa held her daughter on a cold road in the dark and felt the child's arms go around her neck, and felt the specific quality of a 7-year-old body finally releasing the tension it had been holding for longer than 7-year-old bodies should hold tension, and said nothing because nothing was the right thing to say. And the cold was clean and the road was empty, and Oren stood 10 steps back, giving them the distance that the moment required. After a while, Ren stood back. She looked at her mother's face. I'm sorry I left, she said. I know. I thought if you were safe here, you wouldn't need me anymore. Kessa looked at her daughter. She felt the sentence arrive and understood immediately what it had cost Ren to produce it, what it had taken to move from the observation to the articulation of the observation. What a 7-year-old had to have been holding for a long time before it came out that clearly. I will always need you, she said, not for watching, not for counting, just for being here. Do you understand the difference? Washin? Ren thought about this seriously with the full weight of her attention, the way she thought about things she intended to get right. I think so, she said. We'll keep working on it. Ren nodded. Then she straightened her coat and turned north and started walking. Kessa stood and walked beside her. Oren fell into step behind them and said nothing, and carried the unlit lamp back toward Graymore and then north toward home. When they reached the house, Bryn was on the porch with Corva. She had woken to find the bed empty and had gone to Corva's room, and Corva had brought her outside rather than inside because outside had more sight lines, and Corva was 12 and understood certain things about what Ren's absence might mean. You're back, Bryn said. I'm back, Ren said. Did you find Daddy? Yes. What happened? He asked where Mommy was, Ren said. He didn't ask if I ate. Bryn absorbed this with the seriousness of a child receiving information she intends to keep. Then he's not really Daddy anymore, she said. He's just a man. Ren looked at her sister. Just a man. Bryn looked at Oren, who was setting the lamp back on its hook by the door. We have a better one. Ren looked at Oren too. The way she looked at everything, with full attention and no decoration. Maybe, she said. She walked inside and sat in her chair by the door, and her hands were flat on the table, and the cycle, when it came, moved at half its usual speed. Maybe. The days after Ren's return had a different texture. Not safer, not yet. The word safe hadn't earned its place, hadn't been tested enough times to be trusted with that kind of weight, but quieter. The way a house gets quiet when the people inside it have stopped pretending about the same things at the same time, not because the hard things were gone, but because the energy that had been spent on pretending had been redirected towards something more honest. Ren ate at the table. She sat in the chair nearest the door, because some habits take longer to break than others, and the chair nearest the door was still the chair nearest the door, regardless of whose table it was. But she ate. She used a spoon. She finished the bowl without counting. "You're eating fast," Bryn observed across the table. "I'm eating normal." Normal for who? Normal for someone who stopped being stupid. "You weren't stupid," Bryn said, with the authority of a 5-year-old who has decided on a position and will hold it. "You were scared. Is there a difference? Stupid doesn't come back." Ren looked at her sister. 5 years old, brown eyes. The specific kind of wisdom that arrives in small bodies, because small bodies don't have room for anything that isn't essential. "When did you get so accurate?" Ren said. "I was always accurate. You were just louder." Corva made a sound from the kitchen. Oren looked at his cup with intense concentration. Kessa watched her daughters from her chair and felt something in her chest that had been a fist for 4 years open another finger. She started working on the third day. Not because anyone asked, not because there was a plan or an obligation or a schedule. Her hands needed something that wasn't holding children or gripping the edge of a table or lying on a mattress while her mind ran the same roads it had been running for 4 years. Her hands knew how to work. They had known since long before the 4 years, since her mother's mother had shown her how to read leather by touch, how to find the structure beneath the surface cracking, how to know what could be saved. She found the shed at the back of Oren's property on the third morning. It was a proper working shed, the kind that accumulates the honest residue of a life lived with practical attention. Old harness leather stacked in a corner, belt offcuts from jobs that had left material behind, a saddle strap cracked along the spine, but good at the edges, a bridle with a broken cheek piece, a canvas satchel with a split bottom that had been set aside to be dealt with and then forgotten by someone who had too many things to deal with and too little time and had simply stopped seeing it. Kessa stood in the doorway. She went in. Oren came looking for her at dusk. He stood in the doorway of the shed and looked at the leather pieces she had sorted by weight and flexibility, arranged on the workbench with the precision of someone who had spent years with her hands and material and knew by touch what could be saved and what had nothing left to save. "What are you doing?" he said. "Working. That's my shed. These are material. Yours is just the building." He looked at the offcuts. At the saddle strap she had cleaned and was drawing a cutting line along with a bit of chalk. "Some of that is garbage. Garbage is material nobody has looked at properly yet. What are you making?" Kessa ran her thumb along the edge of the strap, feeling the grain, feeling where the crack was surface and where it went through. "The leather decides," she said. "Leather doesn't decide things. You haven't spent enough time with leather." She found a curved knife in the tool drawer and began to cut. Her hands moved with the fluency of muscle memory stored below thought, independent of everything else that had happened to the body those hands belonged to. The skill had been in her fingers before the 4 years started, and it was in her fingers now, and the 4 years had not touched it. By the time the light failed, Corva's torn school satchel sat on the porch rail, the split bottom restitched with wax thread, the broken buckle replaced with a rivet cut from the harness scraps. The stress points reinforced so it would hold another 2 years before it needed attention again. "You fixed my bag," Corva said the next morning, standing on the porch with it in her hands. "It was broken. I've been carrying it broken for 2 months. You don't have to now." Corva turned it over twice, examining the stitching with the focus she applied to everything. "Can you fix other things?" she asked. "Depends on the thing. There's a woman on the next street. Had her. Her boot buckle broke 10 days ago and she's been lacing it closed with twine and talking about it to everyone in earshot. If it were fixed, the quality of conversation on this street would improve considerably." Bring me the boot. She doesn't know you. She'll know my work. Corva brought the boot. Hatter came to pick it up. She was 60, broad through the shoulders, with the direct manner of someone who had been telling the truth for so long that any other approach would feel like wearing the wrong coat. She looked at the repair, looked at Kessa, looked at the repair again. What do you charge, she said. What do you think it's worth? More than the twine I was using. She named a price. Kessa took it. The coins sat in her palm and she looked at them for a moment, just a moment, before closing her fingers around them. First money she had earned in 4 years that hadn't come from a kitchen drawer, counted in silence and replaced before morning. That's yours, Orrin said that evening when he saw the coins on the table. I know. I mean, it's properly yours. You earned it here. I know what earned means. He was quiet, the way he was quiet when he was saying something carefully that had taken him longer to arrive at than the moment suggested. You don't owe anything for the room, he said. Kessa looked at him. I know what I don't owe. I also know what I do. What do you owe? A stove, 2 beds. A man who stood 40 steps away in a dark square because he understood something most men don't understand. She paused. I know the difference between a debt and a gift. I'm not confused about which this was. Orrin looked at the cup in his hand, set it down, said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The second customer came the next day, then 2 more by the end of the week. A belt with a cracked keeper, work gloves with split seams, a coin purse with a broken clasp, a harness that had been repaired badly twice before and needed to be taken apart and done properly. Kessa worked on the porch because the light was better there, and because working on the porch meant being outside, and being outside meant being seen, and being seen meant existing in a way that had a different qualities than the existing she had done inside rooms with closed doors for 4 years. She existed on a porch now. She existed in a way that people could look at and that could look back. A sign appeared at the end of the second week. Corva made it, painted it on a piece of cured board with careful letters. Repairs. Below it, a stitching motif Bryn had contributed by pressing her fingers in ink and running them along the bottom edge in a pattern she described as decoration. It's professional, Corva said, surveying it. It has handprints on it, Kessa said. All the best businesses have handprints on them. Historically. Kessa looked at Bryn, who was very pleased with herself. She left the sign. Wren sometimes sat near the porch while Kessa worked. She held leather flat while her mother stitched. She sorted rivets into the clay cups by size, which was useful, and into secondary categories by what she described as personality, which was Bryn's influence. She didn't talk much during the work, but her hands were steady and her presence was its own kind of participation. The way children offer help before they have words for the offering. Your stitching pressure is even, Kessa said one afternoon. I'm just holding it flat. You're holding it at the right tension. Most people either grip too hard or go loose without noticing. Wren looked at her own hands, considering them as if seeing them from the outside. How do you know what's right, she asked. You feel when it's wrong. The leather tells you. Like the beetle, Wren said. Kessa looked at her. In the square, Wren said. The first night. The beetle knew which crack to go into because it had been going there. Bryn watched it. Like that, Kessa said. Wren went back to holding the leather flat, and the stitch went even, and the morning light came down on the porch at the angle it came down in October before the cold closed in fully. And somewhere in the square, the market was running, and people were looking at the sign and finding their way to the porch. The scan cycle slowed. Not gone. Wren would probably always scan. It was part of how she was built now, the same way scar tissue is part of how healed skin is built. Present, functional. Not the wound anymore, but shaped by it. But the interval stretched, 8 seconds to 12, 12 to 20, 20 to 30, then sometimes longer, the gaps opening the way ice opens in early spring, not all at once, but in stages, each stage only possible because the one before it held. Kessa watched without saying anything. She had learned that naming certain things too early was a way of making them self-conscious, and self-conscious things tended to freeze. She waited. She worked. She watched the intervals stretch. Breck came back on a market day. 3 weeks after the night at the inn, 3 weeks after Wren had walked out from behind a table and chosen which side to stand on. The morning was clear, the cold settled but not yet bitter, the market running with the ordinary noise of commerce and conversation. Kessa was on the porch with a harness across her knees, her needle moving through a long repair that would take most of the day and that she was content to give it. Bryn was on the step beside her, sorting leather scraps into piles organized by color and by what Bryn described as mood, which was its own system and not to be questioned. Kessa heard the horse before she saw it, not the sound exactly, the rhythm. The rolling, careless weight of a horse ridden by a man who had never learned to sit lightly in a saddle because sitting lightly required thinking about what was beneath you, and Breck had spent his life thinking about what was ahead of him. She set the needle down. Her hands went still on the harness, flat, quiet, the stillness of a body that has heard a specific signal and responded before the mind has finished processing it. Bryn looked up from her color piles. Mommy. Go inside, Kessa said. Why? Bryn, right now. Bryn looked at her mother's face and read it the way children read certain things, through the instrument that bypasses language entirely and reads the weather directly. She gathered her leather scraps and went inside. The door didn't close all the way. Through the gap came the sound of small feet stopping just on the other side. Wren appeared at the window, not in it, at the edge of it where she could see without being seen. The scan cycle had returned to full speed from wherever it had been retreating, running at 8 seconds again, the intervals it used when it was working hardest. The horse came around the corner of the main road. Brown, thin through the ribs, head lower than it had been 3 weeks ago at the inn. The horse of a man who traveled hard and forgot that the thing carrying him had different requirements than he did. Breck rode the way he always rode, with the forward weight of a man who expected the world to move out of his path, because it mostly had. He saw Kess on the porch. He pulled the horse up. They looked at each other across the distance of the street, in the distance of everything else, and Kessa felt her body's old response, the inward flinch, the instinct to make herself smaller, the habit of 4 years present in her muscles, if not in her will. And she felt it, and she did not move, and she let it pass through her, and she stood. Found you, he said. You followed tracks from an inn to a road to a town. Kessa's voice came out level. She had not planned the levelness. It was simply there. That's not finding. That's following a road everyone else was also on. Come home. You said that at the inn. I've changed. She looked at him. At the horse with its showing ribs. At the coat he had not cleaned. At 3 weeks of road in his face. When, she said. I stopped drinking. When? 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks has not changed. 3 weeks is a pause long enough to call something else. Vela. That name used to make me move differently, she said. Make me speak quieter. Take up less space. She set the harness aside on the porch rail and stood. She stood at her full height, which was not small. I slept sitting up for 9 days because my body had stopped believing that lying down was something available to me. She paused. Then someone gave me a bed, and I remembered what flat felt like. Breck looked past her at the window. Wren, he called. His voice shifted into the register he had used with the girls when he wanted them to come. The softer version, the one that made it sound like a request rather than a direction. Nothing moved on the other side of the glass. Wren, come here. Silence. Kessa said, she can hear you. Breck dismounted, left the horse at the edge of the road, walked toward the porch with the forward motion of a man who had been walking toward things his whole life. He had taken 4 steps when Kessa said stop. He stopped because the voice was wrong. He knew every frequency of her voice, had learned them over 4 years, had learned especially the frequencies that told him how much room he had. He knew the afraid voice and the careful voice, and the voice she used when she was trying to make things smaller by making herself smaller. He knew all those voices. He did not know this one. You take 1 more step toward this porch, Kessa said, and every person on this street sees what you are. There were people on the street. There were often people on the street at market time. A woman who had stopped filling her bucket at the well and was now not filling it. A man outside the grain merchant who had found a reason to stay where he was. The baker across the way, visible through her open door, polishing a counter she had already polished. I will say, Kessa continued out loud, in front of everyone watching, exactly what you did. Not a version of it, not the softer version. The true version, plainly. You can take whatever comes after that and live with it the way I lived with everything you did when I was too frightened to say it plainly. Breck's jaw set. the look of a man who has been publicly named and is doing the arithmetic of response. The front door opened. Oren came out. He didn't come out in front of Kessa. He came out beside her, one step back, to her right, with the deliberateness of a man who had chosen his position carefully and intended to occupy it without moving. Not a wall between Kessa and Breck. Not a shield, a witness, a body that said someone else is here and watching, said it without a word, with posture alone. "Who are you?" Breck said. "The man whose porch you're near," Oren said. "This is between me and my wife. She's talking back. That seems to be the problem. This doesn't involve you. Her daughter sleeping in my house made it my business." Breck looked at him for a long moment, taking his measure, doing the physical arithmetic of the situation. Then he looked at Kessa. "This isn't over." "Yes," Kessa said, "it is. I'll find you again. Whenever you move, wherever you go, I always find you." Kessa looked at him steadily, at this man she had shared 4 years and 2 children with, at the specific topography of his face which she had learned to read for weather the way she now read everything for weather. "You can try," she said, "and I'll be here on this porch, with my work and my daughters and the people on this street who have heard what you did." She paused. "Bring whatever you think that gets you." Breck stood in the street for a long moment. Then he got on his horse. He rode out the way he had come, his shoulders still carrying the posture of a man who intended to return. And maybe he would, and maybe it would be a problem for another day, but he was gone from this street in this moment. And the morning air came back into the space where he had been, and Kessa breathed it in. The woman at the well resumed filling her bucket. The man outside the grain merchant went back inside. The baker's door stayed open. Oren stood beside her, present and still. "He didn't need me out there," Kessa said. She was watching the corner where the horse had turned and disappeared. "No," Oren said. "Then why did you come out?" He was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a man who has the answer and is deciding how to carry it. "Because," he said, "standing beside someone is different from standing in front of them." Kessa looked at him. He was looking at the road, the empty road where Breck had been, which was now just a road. "You didn't say anything," she said. "You didn't need me to." "Then what did you do?" He met her eyes. "Didn't leave." She looked at him for a long moment, at the jaw which had opinions, at the hands resting open at his sides, the hands of a man who had spent the last 3 weeks demonstrating through small and consistent acts that hands could rest open rather than closed. At the specific quality of his stillness, which she had learned over 3 weeks, was not the stillness of someone waiting to act, but the stillness of someone who had decided that most situations did not require action and had made his peace with being right about that. She looked at him and said nothing. But she turned back to the porch and sat back down with the harness across her knees. And Oren sat in the chair at the far end of the porch that he usually sat in when he came out to check the sky for weather, or pretended to, and neither of them said anything else about it. And the morning went on around them. The night came the way nights come when they carry something, quietly, without announcement. Just the ordinary dark deepening past the point where the stove light couldn't quite reach the corners. The girls were asleep. Bryn curled around her doll with the total commitment of a child who has decided this is where she lives now and has made herself at home in every available inch of the mattress. Wren on her back, arms at her sides, the posture of a child who was still learning that horizontal was something she was allowed, that she didn't have to hold herself ready, that the work of the night could belong to someone else. Kessa sat on the porch with the finished harness in her lap. She had finished it that afternoon. She was holding it now not because it needed anything more, but because her hands liked having something in them when the rest of her was working on something else. Oren came out. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then came and sat at the far end of the bench. "Clear night," he said. "You check the sky when you need a reason to be outside," Kessa said. "You've done it 5 times this week." He was quiet. "Why did you really come out this morning?" she asked. "Not the answer you gave me. The real one." Oren looked at the road, at the empty place where Breck had been, which was just a road now, a road to wherever roads went. "My sister's name was Merritt," he said. Kessa had known this. Corva had told her the first night, under the canvas in the square. She had kept it in the place where she kept things she intended to look at when the time was right, and had been patient about knowing when that was. She waited. Her husband hurt her the way Breck hurt you, Oren said, carefully. That particular careful that those men have, where they know exactly how much is invisible and they stay inside that. He was quiet for a moment. I visited twice a year. She wrote every month. Every letter said the same thing. We're fine, Oren, we're managing. Don't worry. He looked at his hands. I believed her, he said, or I chose to believe her. There's a difference, and I understood the difference at the time, and I chose the one that cost me less. He paused. I was 2 towns away buying grain when the healer was called. She said Merritt's body had simply run out of the thing that keeps a body going when everything else has been taken. The healer said exhaustion. The neighbors said nothing. And I had her letters going back 3 years, all saying to her fine. I'm sorry, Kessa said. He shook his head, not dismissing it, moving past it to where he had already been. When Corva came back from the square that first night and told me what she'd seen, I put the basket down and stood there, he said. I told myself I was giving you space, respecting your decision about what you needed. He paused. That was partially true. The other part was that I was standing there because I didn't trust myself. Because the last time I walked towards someone who needed help, I'd been somewhere else first and arrived to find it was too late. He looked at her. I didn't trust that I knew how to do it right, how to be close to something that needed closeness without making it worse. You came out this morning, Kessa said. Yes. Why? He turned and looked at her directly. Not the oblique angle he usually maintained, the careful lateral attention of a man who had learned that full attention was a kind of pressure. Directly. The full attention of a man who had decided this particular thing deserved it. Because he said you deserve someone who was going to be outside when the door opened. Not to fix anything, not to stand in front of anything. Just to be there so you weren't alone on that porch. He paused. And because Merritt died writing letters that said she was fine, and I was the person she was writing them to, and I stopped asking if fine was the truth. I came out because this time I didn't want to be the person who stayed inside. Kessa looked at him for a long time. You came out because of her, she said. Not me. Yes, he met her eyes. And because you deserved someone who wasn't going to make the same choice twice. The space between them on the bench was not large. She had been aware of it for weeks, the way you become aware of a distance when you have been measuring in all distances for a long time, and this one has acquired a different quality than the others. She picked up the harness, set it down again. She reached across the bench and took his hand. Not quickly, not with the quality of someone moving before they lose the nerve. With the deliberateness of a woman who has made a decision and is doing the thing the decision calls for, because she has been not doing things for 4 years and is finished with that. His hand was warm. She felt his pulse through his palm. Or that was hers. The rhythms were close enough that she couldn't separate them. You're shaking, she said. He was. Slightly. The honest tremor of a large man trying to be still and not entirely succeeding. I know. A man who manages trade disputes and has opinions about load-bearing capacity. Facing down is easy, he said. Getting close is hard. Why? He looked at their hands on the bench between them. Because close means I could break something. You won't. You don't know that. She looked at him steadily. Men who shake when they get close, she said, don't break things. The ones who break things don't shake. She paused. They're sure. She let him inside. The door closed. The porch lamp kept its light, small and steady, casting its circle into the dark, illuminating the bench and the rail and the sign with Bryn's fingerprint border. The night was clear. The street was quiet. In this house, there were people who had found each other through the specific combination of a 12-year-old who couldn't walk past something wrong, and a man who had learned to stand 40 steps away, and a woman who had needed both of those things at the same time. She led. He followed. His hands went where she placed them and nowhere else. Because after 4 years of someone else's hands doing what they wanted, her hands needed to go first. He shook the whole time, the honest, involuntary shaking of a man who was not sure and did not pretend to be sure, and she would tell him later that it was the most truthful thing a man had ever done. Morning came the way mornings come after nights that change things. Ordinary. The light coming in at the angle light comes in at when the season is turning. The smell of porridge because Corva had started cooking without being asked somewhere in the second week, and had continued, treating it as a task that needed doing and therefore a task that was hers. Bryn was at the table. She looked at Orrin when he came down the hall. "You slept here," she said. "I live here. In the house. All the way inside the house." "Eat your porridge," Corva said, from the stove without turning around. "But where did?" "Bryn." Bryn looked at her porridge, looked at Orrin, looked at the hallway behind him where Kessa had appeared. She looked at her mother, then at Orrin, then at the space between them, which was close, closer than the space they usually maintained. A proximity that was new this morning and that Bryn was noting with the thorough attention she brought to new information. Something moved through her 5-year-old face. The rapid process of a child updating her understanding of how things are arranged and arriving at the far side of the update satisfied. She went back to her porridge. Wren was in her chair, the chair nearest the door. She had a cup in her hands and she was looking at Orrin with the expression she used when she was running an assessment she intended to complete before speaking. She looked at him for a long moment, then at Kessa, then at the space between them. "Your porridge is getting cold," she said. Orrin looked at her. "Is that concern?" "It's observation. Observation that sounds like concern." Wren looked at her cup. "Sounds like porridge getting cold." Orrin sat down. Corva served. The bowls were the same clay bowls they had used every morning, and they steamed in the morning light, and the stove behind them breathed its steady heat, and the windows showed the clear October sky beyond their working latches. "Mommy," Bryn said. Are we staying?" Kessa looked at the table. At the 4 bowls, 2 orc and 2 human, all of them steaming. At Wren in her chair with her cup. At Bryn with porridge on her chin she had not noticed. At Corva at the stove, her back to the room, giving them the privacy of her attention being elsewhere. At Orrin beside her, not across from her, beside the small choice of proximity that was its own kind of answer to a question nobody had asked out loud yet. "What would staying mean to you?" Kessa asked. Bryn considered this with the full weight of her 5-year-old concentration. "Does it mean lying down every night?" "Yes." "Does it mean the stove?" "Yes." "Does it mean Corva?" Corva turned from the stove. "I want it to," she said. Flat, simple. The voice of someone who has thought about this and knows where she stands. Bryn nodded, absorbing. She looked at Orrin with the total focus of a child performing an assessment she understands to be significant. She looked at his face and his hands around the cup and the slight remaining tremor in them and the way he was sitting and the specific quality of his stillness. "He's scared of moths," she said. "He is," Kessa said. Bryn thought about this. "Men who are scared of moths don't hit," she said, in the tone of someone reciting an established principle. "Then we're staying. We're staying." Bryn nodded once and went back to her porridge with the decisiveness of someone who has completed an important task and is now free to focus on other things. Wren had been watching all of this. She had watched Bryn go through her assessment, had watched her mother's face, had watched Orrin's hands, and the way Kessa sat beside him, and the way the morning light came through the window onto 4 bowls. Kessa looked at her older daughter, at the chair nearest the door, at the hands resting on the table's edge, not gripping, just resting, the fingers loose. "Wren," she said. Wren looked at her. The moment between them was long and contained several things at once. The 4 years before, the 9 days of roads and towns and a canvas trestle table at the end of a market square, a beetle finding a crack between stones, a gust of charcoal note under a folded blanket on a bed that smelled like someone who said things plainly. A cold road in the dark and a mother crouching to open her arms and a child walking into them. And the 8-second cycle, running for 3 years, longer than the 4, longer than the distance from a kitchen drawer to a back road in October, longer than the carrying of a sister on a small back in the dark. Wren looked at the front door, at the bolt thrown from inside, at the window with its working latch, at the distance from where she sat to the nearest exit, which she had measured on the first morning and had not stopped measuring. She looked at all of it. Then she looked at her mother. "The door's right there," she said. Her voice was quiet and level and carried something in it that had not been in it before, not an absence of the vigilance, but a change in its nature. The way a soldier's stance changes when the war is over and the body is still trained, but the training is no longer the most important thing. "I just don't need to count it first anymore." Kessa looked at the table. at the 4 steaming bowls. Not fine, she said. The word arrived as the room and stayed there, taking up the space that the other word had occupied for years without deserving it, settling into the corners and the spaces between the chairs, claiming its territory. Wren was quiet, then safe. She said it the way she said things that she had thought about fully and intended to stand behind. Kessa looked at her older daughter, her 7-year-old, with the soldier's eyes that were, this morning in this light, something other than a soldier's eyes. Still watchful, still precise, but resting in the watchfulness for the first time in longer than Kessa had been counting. Wren set her cup down on the table. Finally, she said, a word that's not a lie. Outside the market square was filling with morning commerce. The canvas trestle table at the far end of the square, the one they had slept under, the one where Corva had crouched down and lifted the edge and changed the direction of several things, flapped once in the wind. It belonged to nobody. It sheltered nothing. In a crack between 2 cobblestones at the far end of the square, a beetle moved with the total certainty of a creature that knew its home exactly and had the whole day ahead of it. At Oren's table, 4 bowls steamed, and Kessa ate breakfast without wrapping the second half in cloth to keep. There was no later to save for. There was the stove, the window with its working latch, the door with its bolt, Bryn eating with both hands, Wren's hands loose on the table's edge, Corva with her opinions about turnips and her inability to walk past something wrong, Oren beside her, not across, with his hands around a cup that was not shaking this morning. Not fine, safe. The word she had been circling for 4 years and 9 days. The word that fine had always been standing in front of, blocking the way with its cheaper currency. Safe. Bryn looked up with porridge on her chin and said, Mommy, can we get a dog? Kessa looked at her. Oren looked at Corva. Corva looked at the ceiling. One thing at a time, Kessa said. But maybe, Bryn said. Maybe is the same as not know. Maybe, Kessa said, is exactly what it is. She picked up her spoon. The morning went on around them, ordinary and full, and the stove breathed its heat into the room, and outside the market ran, and the clouds moved, and somewhere on the south road, a brown horse was carrying a man further away from this town with every hour. And here in this house, 4 people ate breakfast, and the light came through 2 windows with working latches, and nobody counted the distance to the door.